Welcome to the Author's Hour. My name is Fred Zerm, and I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We're a volunteer organization. Our mission is to support and supplement the activities of the institution's Writers Center. And by doing that, we hope to encourage writers and promote writing on the institution grounds and beyond. We sponsor a number of events aimed at doing just this. Every week, we have two events. One is this, the Author's Hour at 12:15 on Thursdays during the 9-week season. The other is open mic, 5 o'clock on Sundays during the 9-week season, but not the 29th, not after the gavel has been tapped and the season has closed. You can find out about all our events by going to our webpage. I'll say it now, but I'll put it in chat, www.chq.org/FCWC for the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. Now we're getting to that part of the season where some of our major annual events have passed. But in this age of technology, they're still available on YouTube. So if you want to see the Robert Pinsky Favorite Poem Project, that entails Chautauquans reading their favorite poems and briefly explaining why that poem means so much to them personally, that's on YouTube. Also, the awards ceremony from the annual writing contest is available there as well. So please, if you regret not seeing something, whether it's a reading or a ceremony, you can check it out on YouTube. In fact, you can even see things from last summer on YouTube. YouTube is sort of our form of immortality these days. We go on the internet. Now, I will have a few more announcements at halftime between readers, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to some great poetry. So I'd like to introduce our first reader, Judith, Judy Bowles. She earned her MFA from the American University, where she taught creative writing. She also led a poetry group at Iona Senior Center for many years and edited 4 books of poetry done by the residents there. Her first book, The Gatherer, was published in 2014. David Baker, who has taught at Chautauqua, by the way, said of it, Bowles's aesthetic is shaped by clarity and a rightness of detail, minimal and revealing. Her second book, Unlocatable Source, was published in August of 2019. Of it, Richard Peabody wrote, her agile water music opens a treasure chest of magic and pain before floating us toward an oceanic satori. She was poet in residence at the Liddell Reserve on Bainbridge Island, Washington in April of 2019. She has read at Politics and Prose. I can vouch for that. I heard her there. The Writers Center, Glen Echo, and many schools and libraries. Bowles's work has appeared in Gargoyle Magazine, Delmarva Review, Innisfree Journal of Poetry, Better Than Starbucks, I love that title, Ekphrastic Review, and Cobalt. Please welcome Judy Bowles.
Thank you, Fred, so much. Thank you. Appreciate that. And all the work that you do. You know, you probably are pretty good at herding cats because you get us all together on time and get us out of here on time. It's really remarkable. Thank you. And to Sony, who we're not seeing right now, but I thank him for the work that he does, which is astronomical. And the technical part of this is just remarkable, and it's so appreciated. And Jason, I am happy to be reading and really privileged to be reading with you. So, so thanks to everybody. My first poem is titled The Future, which it makes me laugh now to think of, only because as Yogi Berra would have said, the future is not what it once was, what it ever was. That is to say, things are so uncertain in our lives that we need a lot of help in getting and thinking about the future. And in this poem, there's a figure from a child's story, from the Curious George stories, which my family loved, the man with the yellow hat, who seems to always get George out of trouble. And he saves him over and over, sort of deus ex machina. And George never learns any lesson. To the joy of children, he continues to be what he is, and the man with the yellow hat continues to save him. So that's all as it should be. But this is a story about the future coming and the reluctance with which we greet it and how we can greet it. The future. Most days, in a whisper, it might come to your door as the thought of a man from the child's story, wearing a yellow hat, saying to prepare, approaching fast from all directions. You'll get busy to get away, maybe stir up some rhubarb to stay with your cozy. He's come to teach, not to eat. The lesson needs to be learned now, and you'll need what you always have in the drawer under your phone, the unsharpened number 2 pencil at the ready. It's coming, they'll say, hand you a red Swiss knife, like a smile. You start to whittle. Rhubarb tinged fingers remember the rhythm of the stroke and the turn of the yellow blunt edge. Memory guides you toward the black graphite heart. Lighter and lighter, grazing the point to a point. Just as occurred to me that the receiver of that news is probably George in the poem. The next one is a poem about my best friend growing up. And it was a remarkable situation that we had because we were both named Judy. I was Judy L and she was Judy A. Both of our mothers were named Grace. And we traced the fact that our birthdays were 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days apart. And that made us, we were sure it made us twins. And so we made up all kinds of stories about how we would live our life and the things that we did. And we permitted each other a great freedom when we were together, much more so than we were separate. And this poem is called The Night Judy Died. The moon was loud with light, as we had been with chattered secrets, that like our breath knew no end and no beginning. We were 2 Judys. Our mothers were Graces, and that proved that we were each other. When we were 5, we told our mothers mud sucked us in, and it had. Dark and foggy soft, oozing under our feet. It brought us home to some dress-up play. We reached down with our toes, felt ourselves go slack like the mud, smeared our hands, painted stockings up to our knees and higher. I told Judy about a box full of my grandfather dropping into the ground. We wondered if he would miss eating. While we were painting long gloves like our mothers, we decided whoever died first would do what it took to come back and tell where she had been and what it was like on a pad of paper left open on the bedside. We did that so that so the death would not last forever. Interesting stuff. This is a poem, my next one, about my grandmother, from whom I learned many, many things that I didn't even know I learned at the time, that I learned as I've gotten older. But my grandmother had a remarkable way of speaking. Some people, she was from Pennsylvania. Some people call it Pennsylvania Dutch, but I'm not quite sure that that's an accurate name of it. At any rate, she had an interesting way of speaking and got my attention a lot. And then I realized at some point that I was incorporating it. So the poem is called This Way of Speaking. That summer after the war, Grandma made a hero out of everyone. Her neighbor Minnie, 2 houses down, was a pioneer spirit and had a firecracker wit. Uncle Mark, a forest ranger in his green suit, was Fire King in his watchtower. She got lofty about the morning glories, saying how they blued the porch. And the corn became a secret that the husk tried to hide. It got my attention, this way of speaking. The rust spots in the bathtub were 2 bears dancing, and I told her so. Sometimes we don't know what we know until later. We learn what we knew. This is a love song. It's a love poem. I have not written many love poems because love is such a vast subject that at any rate, this is a love poem to my husband of many, many years. Anniversary song. I put myself near you with these words, as if we hadn't woken up together in bed this morning, your hand on mine, and with a gentle squeeze, we agreed on a half-hour more of such ease. Better to ask a wave where it came from before the ocean would show its heave than to trace the source of our handhold. There is distance so vast, it can't be seen, except in small versions of itself, which the kindness of nature permits. On an airplane, it's amazing how we are released from a lot of the stringents that we're under when we have things very familiar around us. And so nothing is familiar around us on a plane, and amazing thing happens. So this is one plane flight that I took to Chicago, and an amazing moment that I was open for happened. It's called The Messenger. And among other things, I thought how separate I was from home on the plane, on the aisle, everyone pushing along, looking up for the cue to their seats. I'll sit for this while in D4, which is my place. But it's blue, and so is the seat right ahead. Blue shrouds these rows and is underfoot too, mixed with squiggles of orange or maybe dark red. The light here is fading from shades being drawn, so laptops and iPads can spring into life. I'm visiting my daughter in college. My seatmate, a vet, never stirred from his sleep when I took my seat. He is so young and so tired, it makes my throat ache. I want this deep rest to be all that he needs. Our bodies are busier than cities, buzzing in noiseless commotion. While the passengers pile through the aisle, a boy no taller than my armrest stops at my seat, says as if answering a question, "I'm going to Chicago." I lean toward him. "I am too." He nods, moves on, calls out, "Mom, she's going to Chicago too." Mother, reaching overhead to the cabinet, says, "Good." people are waiting, he returns to the armrest like the dutiful messenger he is. Good. So I'll tell you, that moment was so special for me that lit up my my day, and it lights me up now thinking about that little boy. I have always been interested in the story of Scheherazade because, you know, it is very difficult to write poems. It is very difficult to write short stories, to write novels, to write anything, sometimes just to write an email. But what if the quality of it was going to give you life or death? And that's the story of Scheherazade. She makes up story after story and somehow saves her life day after day. I've always wondered what happened, because we know the 2001 nights, but I've always wondered what happened on the 2002. That there's a reason that we don't know that. I don't know what that might be, but if you know, let me know. This poem is called Come Back Tomorrow, which is the words that the Sultan said to the executioner every morning when he came to get Scheherazade. He would say, come back tomorrow. The radio is playing Scheherazade. She listens and gathers a towel to her heart, wonders how the melody keeps hold of its sweet violin, and how the princess keeps hold of her song, suspended in time on a slender thread. The laundry is heavy and damp deep in the machine and clings like reluctant children who want to stay. But the storied music reaches down to her hands for the lifting and heaving into the dryer. The hollow sound of the door, the percussive thump of rotating wetness. She thinks of the princess who weaves surprise and suspense with the sensual ease of a snake charmer under threat of the morning and a knock at the door. The music comes close to a goal, then veers to go elsewhere, but still stays connected. The dryer felt warm and the load would grow lighter. Art can do that for us, can't it? It can make our load lighter. It's an amazing thing. I'm hoping that everybody in our audience is too young to have thought that they should smoke in order to grow up. I'm hoping that time is over altogether. But it was very prevalent in my youth, and learning to smoke was a rite of passage to become a grown-up. And certainly the movie stars showed us time and time again that that was the way to be a grown-up. By the way, I was a committed smoker, and I'm now a recovered smoker. Glad to say the Surgeon General got me on the right path. But this poem is called Learning to Smoke. The first time I smoked on Beverly's bed, she taught me how to inhale by showing me to take the deep drag that pulls the smoke in and down into the throat and made the tip glow like the fireflies we tried to keep alive in old pickle jars. Everything in me said no and clamped down. I let my cheeks puff out like a fish while I decided how long to hold on to the nasty taste like a deer. Bev said, think of Bette Davis in All About Eve, where she waved the cigarette around like a flashlight while she stunned the crowd. And then in the silence that followed, she lifted her chin, sucked in that smoke, and taking her time, blew it out in one definitive stream. She showed the long angle of her throat, her eyes shut to take it all in. She's making herself bigger. She's getting enormous with her face close to his. what it was to be a grown-up at age 14. For a deep breath or two, I became. Just checking my time here. The Babar books are wonderful books that our family loved. And they start off with a really difficult moment. If you remember, Babar's mother gets shot by hunters. And I will always remember the picture of Babar with the little tears dropping down. And what a thing to have in a child's story right at the beginning of the story. So the story really is about Babar's recovery. And he goes to the city with his cousin Celeste, who he's going to later marry. But anyway, he goes to the city with her, where he finds the old lady. And the old lady takes him under her wing and begins to take care of him. And this poem is a letter that the old lady writes to Babar after he's gone back to the jungle. And in the letter, she lets him know what it was like for her having him there and what she learned from him. Dearest, my little Babar, you were so darling, so large, and so lost when we met. I knew you were sad and wanted a suit. Do you remember? And I gave you my purse to buy one. Bright green, a shirt and a tie, a derby hat, shoes with spats, and an automobile, shiny red, to ride in each day. I wanted to make you my own, dear thing. You stood on your two hind legs in my parlor and discussed affairs in your great forest like a well-versed explorer, leaning into our luxury with ease. But late at night, I heard the shutter shake at your window and knew you were leaning there, weeping there for your unbelonging. It was your tears, how they burned from more than mere memory. They were your gentle guide, those star-laden nights when you shed the fine clothes, the cane and the spats, and stood unadorned in all but your tears. Wonderful tears that kept you from being a changeling under my wing. Woe led you straight to your hurt in hiding, straight home to the headlands of your green jungle home. You, child of my heart, I've learned all that I know from you, the old lady. And that's my final poem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. People should know that Judy's poems are available through Amazon. Yes, and there's The Gatherer, and then her latest Unlocatable Source. Your poems today, were most of them from one book or the other, or were they new poems?
They were from a few from the first book, a few from the second, and a few new poems. The rest new.
Great. I look forward to your next book, and you have some good things coming.
Thank you.
A few announcements. One, the CLSC, that's the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle, reputedly the oldest continuously running book club in America. Their author of the week, Jim Tankersley, will be speaking at 3:30 today on that Chautauqua Assembly platform that some people were talking about before we began. His book is The Riches of This Land, and this week's focus at Chautauqua is on our economy and where does it go from here. I'll be putting links for the assembly and also for what I'm about to mention, the virtual porch. I'll put that in chat in a moment. Tomorrow at 12:15, our prose writer of the week, T. Geronimo Johnson will be delivering his brown bag lecture on prose writing. His talk, as well as other Writers of the Week's talks, will be available in recorded form on the virtual porch. So earlier this week, for instance, Poet of the Week, January Gill O'Neill, gave a lot of tips about how to keep yourself writing, especially during trying times like these. I did want to mention that our sister literary and performing art, the Chautauqua Theater Company, will be presenting the play Thurgood about Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall tomorrow and then again next week. So if you're in the actual Chautauqua, physical Chautauqua, you might see whether tickets are still available to that. Okay, back to the author's hour. Jason Irwin is the author of 3 collections of poetry. His most recent, The History of Our Vagrancies, published by Main Street Rag. Before that, A Blister of Stars, interesting phrase, wonderful title, by Logos back in 2016. Watering the Dead by Pavement Saw Press in 2008. And besides these full collections, he also had the chapbook, Some Days It's a Love Story, put out by Slipstream Press in 2005. He has also had nonfiction published in 10 Literary Journal, Cleaver Magazine, The Crux, and The Catholic Worker. He grew up in Dunkirk, New York, which is near Chautauqua, and was an intern at the Chautauqua Writers Center in 2002. He now lives in Pittsburgh, and I'd like to thank Mark Altschuler for first alerting me to Jason and his fine poetry. Jason, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who took time out of their day to be here. And thanks to Fred, of course, and Judith. All right, I'm going to start with a poem from my book, The History of Our Vagrancies, a few of them. This is called Monk Dreams, and many of the lines are taken from song titles by Thelonious Monk. Monk Dreams. I surrender, dear. This locomotive is on fire. Meet me at the riverside round midnight, or in Tokyo, where the chimneys are green, and the monks in their hair shirts and dark desires dream of life on Easy Street. We'll populate the world with comfortable furniture, glasses full to the brim, and raise 4 for Miles and Bird. Life is a chain of consequences, a song you find yourself riffing on as you go, bending notes, sliding in and out of key, the major, the minor, the flatted sevenths, all the colors that kaleidoscope this dream we keep dreaming, this boogie woogie bebop life, this runaway train. When I was a child, my mother joined this group called Kairos, which was an ecumenical group that did prison ministry. And I used to accompany her on a couple of the events, and this is about one of them. It's called Among Strangers. In church that night, we listened to a tall, pockmarked man testify about the life he once lived, about the grocery clerk he'd killed. Standing on the pulpit, he coughed, loosened his tie, apologized. He'd come here tonight, he said, among strangers, after years in prison, to ask forgiveness. I swallowed hard, felt my legs tighten. I was 12 years old. I never met a murderer before. I wanted to ask how he did it, If killing someone was just like on TV, if he feared hell, I thought about my own sins, stealing candy bars, cursing God, throwing rocks at a neighbor girl. Later that night, my mother and I, along with others from the church, drove across Route 39 to the corrections facility. Rain drizzled, lightning veined the eggplant sky. We gathered outside the razor wire. Our shoes sank in the mud and wet grass. Wax from the candles we were given dripped on our fingers. Someone started to sing On Eagle's Wing as a thin line of prisoners marched into view on the opposite side of the fence. Suddenly, as if an invisible cord had been pulled, they began to wave their hands and sway. While in the distance, a sleepy guard in the watchtower held us in his crosshairs, the way I imagined God held us in his hands. This poem is called Poem About My Father Disguised as the End of the World.
Jason, we're having a lot of trouble.
Everyone knows this landscape is a
Jason.
facade.
Jason.
Okay, we'll try this again. This poem is called Among Strangers, and it's about when I was a child, my mother joined Kairos, a group that ministered to incarcerated people. Among Strangers. In church that night, we listened to a tall, pockmarked man testify about the life he once lived, about the grocery clerk he killed. Standing at the pulpit, he coughed, loosened his tie, apologized. He'd come here tonight, he said, among strangers, after years in prison, to ask forgiveness. I swallowed hard, felt my legs tighten. I was 12 years old. I'd never met a murderer before. I wanted to ask how he did it, if killing someone was just like on TV, if he feared hell. I thought of my own sins, stealing candy bars, cursing God, throwing rocks at a neighbor girl. Later that night, my mother and I, along with others from the church, drove across Route 39 to the corrections facility. Rain drizzled, lightning veined the eggplant sky. We gathered outside the razor wire. Our shoes sank in the mud and wet grass. Wax from the tiny candles we were given dripped on our fingers. Someone started singing On Eagle's Wing as a thin line of prisoners marched into view on the opposite side of the fence. Suddenly, as if an invisible cord had been pulled, they began to wave their hands and sway. While in the distance, a sleepy guard in the watchtower held us in our crosshairs, the way I imagined God held us in his hands. Thanks. This is called Poem About My Father Disguised as the End of the World. Everyone knows this landscape is a facade, propped up horizon of corkboard and tin, curve of flesh, lick of salt. It's all we can do to endure the next few hours. Gridlock on the drive home, the unavoidable reckoning of empty rooms. Who can say for certain we're not descended from the stars? When I was a boy, I lay in bed while my veins burned. My father was an asteroid. Some nights I caught sight of him crashing through space. Other times, he was the whiskey in my glass, the voice crying no. The almanac predicts a treacherous end. There'll be no more pleasantries, no more husky dreaming of your favorite natural disaster, no VIP value meals or cream in your coffee. So call down the gods if you want, the traffic police, insurance men. They're only smoke signals in the fog, puckers on the midway, nails bitten down. Several years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about composer Chopin and how his heart was found embalmed inside of a pillar in a church. And I kind of became obsessed with that story. And this is a poem called Chopin's Heart. A brief apocalypse has taken possession of my person. The streets are full of melancholy. Yesterday, I fell asleep on the bus. The sound of someone crying woke me. Was it the woman slumped in her seat like a bag of laundry? Or my mother, 40 years ago, the night Elvis died, and I held her hand as she trembled at the kitchen table? In the Times this morning, a story about Chopin's heart, found submerged in a brown liquid, thought to be cognac. On his deathbed, Chopin asked that his heart be cut out and returned to his beloved Warsaw. Imagine if our own hearts could be extracted and one day discovered, swaddled like unholy relics. The first known depiction of the heart as a symbol of romantic love was found in a 13th century French manuscript, where a kneeling lover offers his heart to a damsel. In a tiny box marked "My Tragedy," Chopin kept letters from his lover, Maria Wadinska, who refused to marry him because of his lifelong ill health. Researchers found Chopin's heart to be massively enlarged and floppy, and covered in a white substance that gave it a frosted appearance. In the dim glow of my apartment, I listened to Elvis's early recordings. Obsessed with death, he visited funeral homes late at night to stare at the bodies. A child prodigy and leading symbol of the Romantic era, Chopin feared being buried alive. He often had vivid dreams of damned creatures inside his piano. Outside my window, the sun has fallen behind the rooftops on Highland Avenue. I feel blood pulse through my veins, feel my heart thump and flutter like a trapped bird. Each night, I cut it out and place it in a tiny box under my bed, somewhere safe, lest I wake suddenly in the pitch dark, with only the dank earth for comfort. "20 years ago, I was working at the bookstore at Chautauqua, 20 years ago this summer, and my grandfather had just died, and I was asked by Carol Hicks, who was part of the Writers Center then, to join a workshop. And that workshop was given by Kevin Pilkington. And the meeting of Kevin and his wife Celia and this poem kind of changed my life. This is called Pocket Knife. Sitting on the back porch steps by the Raspberries Rebellion, I finger your tobacco-stained Kingston pocket knife, as if it were a magic lamp that might connect me to you once more. The knife you chipped Captain Black from your pipe with, hands, fingers swollen with gout and arthritis, hands that shoveled coal into steel plant furnaces for 40 years, taught me to peel an apple, hold a bat. The same knife you gave me for my 10th birthday, I swore I lost playing kickball. The knife Uncle Joe found in a kitchen drawer, looking for money and old baseball cards. Above where Grandma kept aprons. Buried in a mass grave of empty Scotch tape dispensers, matchbooks, and expired coupons. Found the day after your funeral, like that photograph in an old cigar box on the cellar stairs. You in Wallace, Idaho, summer 1933, standing so proud on that rocky bluff, hands deep in denim pockets, dimpled smile, thick dago hair, looking like I look now, age 30, wishing I had the courage to hug you more. This is a poem inspired by Dylan Thomas and reading his American journals many years ago. It's called Black and Tanned. The title refers to black and tan beer. And this goes out to my good friend Eric. Black and Tanned. Black and tanned, we hurly-burlied through the ship swaying of streets and doorways, in maze of cityscapes. Amid the sweat of clinking glass laughs, propelled by a taste for the tragic. In a bitter swill of blurred antidotes and redundancies, we have talked of heroes, villains, and the sacredness of socks. I have 3 more poems. This next one is called Poem for Jerry and is dedicated to the poet Jerry Crinan, my good friend and first poetry mentor. Poem for Jerry. The jays and wrens sing his legend. The furry creatures call him saint, moonstruck uncle, he who dresses like a windy day, while the gnomes cast eyes of caution whenever he moves through the tall grass, murmuring his strange benedictions, his elegies to ribwort and tree bark. Each night they watch as he recedes like the sun behind the doors of his domicile. Each morning they gather like soporific pilgrims, waiting for him to come forth. This is called Anniversary. All day I felt the need to call you, as if there was something important I should say. How to explain this restlessness, this feeling of being stranded when all around me the world is in motion. You stopped breathing when I went into another room. A hospice nurse assured me this was not uncommon. I imagined that if you could, you'd have leapt from the window and run away like an animal, embarrassed by your own helplessness. This morning, as I waited for the bus, snow fell in the glow of a streetlight, like the afternoon you died. It reminded me of fireflies swarming, falling, yet never touching the earth. Thank you. My last poem is for my wife, Jenny. It's called Everything That Brought Us Here. Sometimes we're misplaced commas in each other's lives, transient as the moth that greets us when we wake in the middle of the night in search of a cracker or that half-finished beer in the fridge. Maybe we're nothing more than a string of moments scattered like photographs after a fire, or the collision of neutrons caught in a gravitational wave event. In another dimension, we could be kings, auto mechanics, or tap dancers. If a man, let's call him Andrew, gets off the bus at 12th and Smithfield and walks 3 blocks south toward the library, and if Amy leaves a coffee shop and walks 3 blocks north and 1 block west. Will they meet? Yesterday, I saw an old man at the bus stop moaning, and a boy with wings strapped to his back fly above the city's tallest buildings. Besieged with regret, nostalgic for places we've never been, and realizing that our cells are constantly dying, we wander through this labyrinth of life, crying over used tea bags in the sink, letters never sent, the body's determined betrayal. My lover traveled 6,500 miles southwest from Indiana to Japan, and another 6,000 miles northeast to Pittsburgh. I drove 3 miles down Swissvale Avenue to an art gallery for a poetry reading and potluck dinner. And though we were both there that night, we would not meet for another year. One day, my mother was in a car accident. At the hospital, X-rays revealed something was wrong. What would our lives be like without cell phones, birth defects, TV dinners, or poetry, falling asleep to rain dripping through a leaky roof? A punctuation error, like a detour, can take us down roads we never intended to travel. Our lives go by like a car crash or supernova, in a moment of ecstasy or anger, watching the sun while washing dishes, worrying about all the places we'll never go to, the books we'll never read. There's so much beauty in the world. Why do we spend our time acquiring things, dwelling on the past, losing ourselves to the headlines? Holed up in his tower, Daedalus still mourns Icarus's extravagant fall. Look at the two of us sitting at the table drinking wine. Each moment of our lives has brought us here. Each moment could have easily led us somewhere else. Thank you.
Let's all unmute and give Judy and Jason a round of applause and appreciation. If you can unmute quickly, if you know how to do that, let's do that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Great.
Oh, my.
We have a little time, if you guys would now mute again. We have a little time for questions or comments. You can either submit them in chat, or you can raise your applause hand under reactions, and we'll take that as a raised hand, like that. Or you can literally wave your hand. Or the fourth alternative is you just unmute and you blurt out a question or a comment that you have. The first thing I would like to say, though, to both of you is that since I'm a writer, I listen for lines that I wish I had written, and I have about 2 pages full. Wonderful stuff. So, do we have any other comments or questions from the assembled multitude? And it's good to see that we have a nice size audience here.
I would just like to say that with both poets today, the small moments of life become monumental, and the kind of things that get overlooked in our lives, I think. And maybe that's the function of the poet, to stop us in our tracks and allow us to really enjoy the moment. So thank you both very much.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed in chat, Carol, you noted one of the lines I was noting too, about the sacredness of socks. Yeah. Or from Judy's, the moon was loud with light. You know, I sort of said, oh yeah, wish I had written that. Yeah. Anything else before we move to closing announcements?
Is it fair game to steal those lines?
There's something about mature artists, right? And we're right. Anyway, I just want to thank Judy and Jason again. Want to alert you to the fact that this is an ongoing series. So even if you showed up today because you know Judy or you know Jason or you know them both, take a chance. Come in the following weeks and hear people maybe you don't know. Next week, we will have Henry Danielson, who's written some poetic series of poetic memoirs collectively called The Island People. He and his wife have been sailing virtually around the world. And he'll be reading some selections from that series. And Laura Lillibridge will be reading from a memoir, Girlish, Growing Up in a Lesbian Home. So I invite you to join us next week. Check out our webpage that I posted in chat. Think about joining the Friends. If you've never physically, literally been to Chautauqua, think about coming next summer or the tail end even of this summer if you have time and the inclination. Anyway, thank you for coming. I will stop the recording now.